The slap echoed through the first-class cabin like a gunshot. 3-year-old Elijah's crying stopped for just 1 second before exploding into heartbroken sobs. His mother Simone clutched him to her chest, trembling. Flight attendant Bethany stood frozen, her hand still raised, her face twisted with anger and disgust. Around them, passengers sat in shocked silence. Then a deep voice cut through the air from the back of the cabin. "You just hit my son." Bethany turned, and the color drained from her face. Before we dive into what happens next, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. Hit that like button if you believe everyone deserves respect regardless of their skin color. And subscribe because this story will shake you to your core. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens when this flight attendant realizes exactly who she just messed with. Now let's rewind and see how we got to this shocking moment. Simone had never flown first class in her entire life. At 27 years old, working double shifts as a nurse at Atlanta General Hospital, she barely made enough to cover rent for the tiny apartment she shared with Elijah. Her son's father had walked out the moment she told him she was pregnant, leaving her to raise their child alone. She worked nights, relied on her elderly neighbor to babysit, and counted every dollar. But when her mother called from New York, voice weak and breaking, saying the cancer had spread and the doctors didn't think she had much time left, Simone didn't hesitate. She called every airline. Economy was sold out on every flight that could get her there in time. The only available seat was in first class, and it cost more than her monthly salary. She borrowed money from 3 different coworkers, promising to pay them back over the next 6 months. As she walked down the jet bridge holding Elijah's hand, her stomach churned with anxiety. She'd never been around wealthy people before. Would they judge her worn jeans and faded jacket? Would they stare at her son's scuffed sneakers? Elijah bounced beside her, excited about the airplane, chattering about clouds and birds. She squeezed his hand gently. "Remember what Mama said. You need to be very quiet and good on this plane. Okay, baby?" Elijah nodded solemnly, his big brown eyes looking up at her with complete trust. Her heart ached. He was so small, so innocent. He had no idea that the world would judge him differently because of the color of his skin. Not yet. They boarded the plane, and immediately Simone felt the stares. A woman in a cream-colored suit looked up from her magazine, her eyes traveling from Simone's face to Elijah's hand in hers, then to their boarding passes. Her lips pressed into a thin line. An older white man in the aisle seat huffed audibly as they passed. Simone's face burned. She found their seats, 3A and 3B, and helped Elijah climb into the window seat. He pressed his face against the glass immediately, marveling at the other planes. That's when she first saw Bethany. The flight attendant was in her mid-30s, blonde hair pulled back in a severe bun, makeup perfect, uniform crisp. She stood near the galley, watching passengers board. When her eyes landed on Simone and Elijah, her expression changed. The professional smile vanished, replaced by something cold and assessing. She walked over slowly, deliberately, her heels clicking on the floor. "Can I see your boarding passes?" Her tone was clipped, almost accusatory. Simone's hand shook slightly as she pulled out the crumpled papers. Bethany studied them for a long moment, as if looking for proof they were fake. Finally, she handed them back without a word and walked away. Simone exhaled. Beside her, Elijah hummed happily, oblivious. What Simone didn't know was that someone else had been watching the entire exchange. Several rows back, in seat 7A, sat a man in an expensive charcoal suit. Harrison Clark was 39 years old, and he was the CEO of Skylux Airlines, the very company operating this flight. But nobody on this plane knew that. Head booked his ticket under a different name, paid cash, and deliberately chose a non-premium seat. This was his quarterly mystery shop, A practice head implemented years ago to see how his employees really treated customers when they thought no one important was watching. Harrison had built his empire from nothing. Born in a Chicago housing project to a single mother who worked 3 jobs, had grown up hungry more often than not. He remembered his mother crying after a store clerk followed them around, assuming they were going to steal. He remembered teachers who looked at him and saw a future criminal instead of a future CEO. He remembered the exact tone of voice people used when they decided you weren't worth their respect, and had just heard that exact tone from one of his own flight attendants. He settled back in his seat, pulled out his phone, and opened a notes app. He began documenting everything he observed. The time Bethany approached Simone, her body language, her tone. This was going to be educational. Meanwhile, in the front of the cabin, Bethany returned to the galley where 2 other flight attendants, Marcus and Delilah, were preparing for departure. Marcus was a young black man, barely 2 years into the job. Delilah was Latina, experienced and professional. Bethany rolled her eyes dramatically. "Did you see who's in 3A?" She muttered to Delilah, quiet enough that passengers couldn't hear, but loud enough for Marcus to catch. "First class is really going downhill. Probably used food stamps to buy that ticket." Marcus' jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He needed this job. Delilah shot Bethany a warning. "Look, that's inappropriate." Bethany shrugged. "I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. You know those people don't belong up here." She probably can't even afford to tip. Those people. Delilah's voice was sharp now. "You need to check yourself." Bethany waved her off. "Oh, please, don't be so sensitive. I'm not racist. I'm just realistic. There's a reason first class exists, and it's for people who know how to behave. That kid is going to be a nightmare. You watch." As if on cue, other passengers began settling in. The cabin filled with the rustle of bags being stowed, phones being silenced, jackets being removed. Bethany moved through the aisle with a bright smile, greeting passengers. "Good afternoon, sir. Can I get you a drink before takeoff? Champagne? Wonderful." She laughed at someone's joke, her voice syrupy sweet. "And for you, ma'am? Sparkling water with lemon?" Right away. She passed Simone's row without stopping, without asking, without even making eye contact. Simone noticed. Of course she noticed. But she told herself it was nothing, just an oversight. The flight attendant was busy. It didn't mean anything. Except it did. Because when Bethany finished serving drinks to every other passenger in first class, when Shed made sure the white woman in the cream suit had her champagne, and the older white man had his scotch, and the young white couple across the aisle had their matching mimosas, she walked right past Simone and Elijah again. She went back to the galley empty-handed. Simone waited a few more minutes, then unbuckled her seatbelt and approached the galley carefully. "Excuse me." Her voice was soft, apologetic, as if she was the one who'd done something wrong. "Could my son and I get some water, please?" Bethany looked up from her phone with obvious irritation. "We're about to take off. You need to return to your seat." You gave everyone else drinks, and I thought, oh, he'll get to you when I have time." Bethany's eyes were cold. "Now please sit down before I have to call the captain." Simone felt like she'd been slapped. She walked back to her seat, face burning, eyes stinging with tears she refused to let fall. Elijah looked up at her. "Mama, you okay?" She forced a smile. "Yes, baby. Mama's fine." But she wasn't fine, and things were about to get much, much worse. The plane began to taxi toward the runway. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, welcoming passengers and announcing their flight time to New York. Engines hummed. Elijah pressed his hands against the window, watching the ground crew wave them forward. For a moment, Simone let herself hope that maybe the rest of the flight would be okay. Maybe that attendant would just leave them alone. Then the plane started accelerating down the runway, and Elijah's excitement turned to fear. The little boy had never flown before. He didn't understand why everything was shaking, why the noise was so loud, why it felt like they were going to crash. His eyes went wide, his bottom lip trembled, and then he started to cry. "Mama," he reached for her, his small body trembling. "Mama, I'm scared." Simone unbuckled his seatbelt and pulled him onto her lap, holding him tight despite the regulations. "It's okay, baby. We're safe. We're just going up into the sky. Remember I told you about flying?" Like a bird. But Elijah was 3 years old, and he was terrified. His cries grew louder. Other passengers started looking over. Simone rocked him, whispered soothing words, rubbed his back. Nothing worked. The plane lifted off the ground, and Elijah's screams intensified. The older white man in the cream suit muttered loud enough to be heard. "This is exactly why children shouldn't be allowed in first class." The woman across the aisle nodded in agreement. "Some people just don't know how to control their kids. It's a matter of upbringing." Simone heard every word. Each one landed like a punch. She wanted to scream at them that her son was scared, that he was just a baby, that she was doing everything she could, but she didn't. She just held Elijah tighter and kept whispering, "You're okay. Mama's got you. You're safe." Bethany appeared in the aisle, her face flushed with anger. "Mom, you need to get that child under control right now." "I'm trying," Simone said desperately. "Hess just scared. Hess never flown before." "Well, maybe you should have thought about that before bringing him into first class." Bethany's voice dripped with contempt. "This is supposed to be a peaceful cabin for people who paid for a premium experience, not a daycare. Please, I'm doing my best. Your best isn't good enough." Bethany leaned in closer, her voice low and vicious. "Let me be very clear. If you cannot control your child, I will have no choice but to report this disruption to the captain. We can have you removed at the next stop. Do you understand?" Simone nodded mutely, tears streaming down her face now. Elijah was sobbing into her shoulder. The other passengers were staring, and Bethany stood there with her arms crossed, as if daring them to make another sound. In the back, Harrison Clark's hands clenched into fists. Head heard every word, seen every gesture. This wasn't just poor customer service. This was cruelty. This was discrimination. And it was happening on his airline, under his watch. He pulled out his phone and started recording, careful to keep it low and discreet. This was evidence he'd need later. The plane leveled off, and gradually, very gradually, Elijah's cries subsided into hiccups and sniffles. Simone managed to get him calmed down enough to buckle him back into his seat. She pulled out a small bag of crackers she'd brought from home and gave them to him. He munched on them quietly, his face still wet with tears, his little chest still heaving with leftover sobs. Simone smoothed his hair back and kissed his forehead. "Good boy. Such a good, brave boy." Bethany returned to the galley and announced loudly to her coworkers, "I swear, some people think buying a first-class ticket gives them the right to let their kids run wild. That child has been screaming for 10 minutes straight." Marcus spoke up quietly. He was scared during takeoff. That's pretty normal for little kids. Normal for little kids who weren't raised properly. Bethany shot back. "When I was growing up, my parents would never have tolerated that kind of behavior. We knew how to sit still and be quiet in public. But I guess different cultures have different standards." Delilah's eyes flashed. "You need to stop. Right now." "Stop what?" "Telling the truth." Bethany turned away, dismissing them both. She grabbed a tray of drinks and headed back into the cabin. That fake smile plastered on her face again. "Here is your second champagne, sir." "Absolutely." Happy to get you another. She walked past Simona's row again without stopping. Simone didn't even bother asking anymore. She'd gotten the message. She wasn't welcome here. Neither was her son. They were being punished for existing in a space that someone like Bethany thought they didn't belong in. Elijah finished his crackers and asked quietly, "Mama, can I have some water?" Simone looked at the call button above their seats. She knew if she pressed it, Bethany would come, and she'd be met with more contempt, more barely concealed disgust. But her son was thirsty, had been crying so hard. She pressed the button. Bethany appeared within seconds, her smile vanishing the moment she saw who had called. "What? Could we please have some water for my son?" Bethany sighed dramatically. "Fine, just a moment." She disappeared and returned with a plastic cup of water, which she set down on Simona's tray table so hard that it sloshed over the side. Then she walked away without another word. Simone handed the cup to Elijah carefully. "Small sips, baby. Slow." Elijah took the cup in both hands. He was tired from crying, his movements shaky. The cup was too full, his hands too small. And as he lifted it to his mouth, the inevitable happened. The cup tipped. Water spilled down the front of his shirt, onto the seat, onto the floor, and splashed onto the cream-suited woman in the row ahead. The woman shrieked, "Oh my God! This suit cost $2,000! Look what that child did." Simona's heart stopped. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." She grabbed napkins from the seat pocket and tried to help, but the woman jerked away from her. "Don't touch me! Just keep your child away from me!" Other passengers turned to stare. The judgment in their eyes was suffocating. Simone knelt down, trying to clean up the water from the floor, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold the napkins. Elijah started crying again, this time from embarrassment and fear. "I'm sorry, Mama. I'm sorry. It's okay, baby. It was an accident. It's okay." But it wasn't okay. Because Bethany had heard the commotion and was storming down the aisle, her face bright red with fury. "That is it." Bethany's voice rang through the cabin like a whip crack. Every conversation stopped. Every head turned. The entire first-class section focused on the unfolding scene, like spectators at a gladiator match. Simone stood up from where she'd been kneeling, still holding soaked napkins, her face streaked with tears. "Please, I'm so sorry. It was an accident. I'll pay for the dry cleaning, You'll what?" Bethany stepped closer, invading Simona's space, her body language aggressive and threatening. "You'll pay for a $2,000 suit on a nurse's salary? You'll pay for the disruption you've caused to every passenger in this cabin? You'll pay for the 15 minutes of screaming that gave everyone a headache." My son was scared. 3 years old. He didn't mean to. I don't care what he meant to do. Bethany's voice rose higher. The professionalism she'd maintained with other passengers had completely evaporated. "I warned you. I told you to control your child. But clearly, you can't. Clearly, you don't belong here." Those last words hung in the air like poison gas. "You don't belong here. Not you can't afford this. Not you're having a difficult time. You don't belong here." The meaning was crystal clear. Simone felt something break inside her. She'd endured the stares, the whispers, the deliberate exclusion. She'd apologized for existing in this space. She'd tried so hard to make herself and her son invisible, inoffensive, acceptable, and it didn't matter. It had never mattered. Because to Bethany, they would never belong here, no matter how well they behaved. "We have just as much right to be here as anyone else," Simone said quietly, but with a strength that surprised even herself. "We bought our tickets. We paid for these seats. My son made a mistake because he's a child, but that doesn't mean we don't belong. Bethany's eyes narrowed. Don't you dare talk back to me. I am the authority on this aircraft. And if I say you're being disruptive, then you're being disruptive. Do you understand me? Elijah, still sitting in his seat, was crying harder now. He could feel the anger in the air even if he couldn't fully understand it. He reached for his mother, his small voice breaking. Mama, I want to go home. Please, I want to go home. Simone turned to comfort him, but Bethany grabbed her arm. Don't you turn away from me when I'm talking to you. Let go of me. Simone pulled her arm free. Don't touch me. I'll do whatever is necessary to maintain order on this flight. Bethany's face was so close to Simone's now that she could smell the coffee on her breath. You people think you can come into spaces like this and act however you want. You think the rules don't apply to you. Well, I'm here to tell you that they do. You people. There it was again. The mask had fully slipped now, and everyone in the cabin could see exactly what Bethany really thought. Marcus appeared from the galley, his face stricken. Bethany, that's enough. Let's all just take a breath. And stay out of this, Marcus. Bethany didn't even look at him. This doesn't concern you. It concerns all of us. You're making a scene. I am making a scene. Bethany whirled on him. That child has been screaming since takeoff, and now he's destroyed another passenger's property. If you can't see that she needs to be held accountable, then maybe you're part of the problem too. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus stepped back, hurt and anger warring on his face. Delilah stood frozen in the galley entrance, and the passengers watched, with a mixture of discomfort and anticipation, like they knew something terrible was about to happen, but couldn't look away. Bethany turned back to Simone and Elijah. The little boy was still crying, still reaching for his mother, his whole body shaking with sobs. And something in Bethany snapped. Later, she would claim it was frustration, that shed only meant to gesture. But what happened next was crystal clear to every person in that cabin. Bethany bent down, her face level with Elijah's, and she hissed, "Stop that crying right now, you little." Her hand came up. Fast, deliberate. She struck him across the face with an open palm, the crack of skin on skin echoing through the cabin like a gunshot. For one frozen second, no one moved, no one breathed. Elijah's crying stopped abruptly, his eyes going wide with shock and pain. A bright red handprint bloomed across his small brown cheek. Then his face crumpled, and he screamed. Not a scared cry, not an upset whimper. A scream of pure pain and terror and betrayal. Simone snatched her son into her arms, her body shaking with rage and horror. "You hit my baby! You hit my baby!" Bethany straightened up, her chest heaving, but her expression showed no remorse. If anything, she looked satisfied. Maybe now hell learned to behave. That's when the voice came from the back of the cabin. Deep, controlled, but carrying an undertone of barely restrained fury that made everyone turn around. "You just hit my son." Bethany turned slowly, following the voice to the back of first class. A tall black man rose from seat 7A, and as he stood to his full height, the overhead lights caught his face. Bethany's smugness evaporated like water on hot pavement. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Because she knew that face. Every employee of Skylux Airlines knew that face. It was on the wall of every office, featured in every corporate newsletter, displayed on the company website's homepage. Harrison Clark, founder and CEO of Skylux Airlines. The man who signed her paychecks, the man who could end her career with a single word. And he was walking toward her with the cold, measured fury of someone who'd just witnessed something unforgivable. Mr. Clark," Bethany stammered, all her earlier confidence draining away. I didn't know you were on this flight. Sir, I can explain. Explain. Harrison's voice was quiet, but it cut through the cabin like a blade. You're going to explain why you just struck a 3-year-old child in the face. The child was being disruptive, sir. I was just trying to maintain order in the cabin. It's my job to ensure all passengers have a pleasant experience, and this child has been screaming and causing problems since we took off. And then he destroyed another passenger's property. And She was babbling now, words tumbling over each other in her panic to justify herself. Stop talking. Harrison held up one hand, and Bethany's mouth snapped shut. He walked past her to where Simone stood, clutching Elijah. The little boy's face buried in her shoulder, his body racked with sobs. Harrison's expression softened completely. Mom, may I see his face? Simone was trembling so hard she could barely hold her son. She didn't understand what was happening, didn't understand why this man had said Elijah was his son, but she could see genuine concern in his eyes. She gently turned Elijah toward him. The handprint was vivid against Elijah's skin. Harrison's jaw clenched so tight the muscle jumped. Had seen a lot of terrible things in his life. Had personally experienced racial discrimination more times than he could count. But seeing it happen to a child, seeing violence inflicted on a little boy who'd done nothing worse than be scared and clumsy, ignited something primal in him. He looked at Simone. My name is Harrison Clark. I own this airline, and I promise you, what just happened here will be addressed in the strongest possible terms. May I ask your name? Simone. Simone Washington. Her voice shook. And this is Elijah. Sir, I don't understand. Why did you say he was your son? Because if I hadn't, Harrison said quietly, she wouldn't have stopped. And I needed her to know immediately that Shed just made the biggest mistake of her career. He raised his voice so everyone in the cabin could hear. Let me make something very clear to all of you. What you just witnessed was assault. It was also a clear act of racial discrimination. And it happened on my airline. Now let me pause the story right here and ask you something. Comment number 1 if you think Bethany deserves to lose her job over this. Comment number 2 if you think she should also face criminal charges. And comment number 3 if you've ever witnessed discrimination like this in person. Hit that like button if you believe Harrison did the right thing by stepping in. And subscribe because what happens next is going to blow your mind. The question is, how will Harrison make sure justice is served? And what does he mean when he calls Elijah his son? Keep watching to find out. Harrison turned back to Bethany, who stood frozen like a deer in headlights. You're done. As of this moment, you are suspended without pay, pending a full investigation. When we land, you'll be escorted off this aircraft by security, and you'll be hearing from our legal team. Sir, please. Bethany's eyes filled with tears now. Real fear replaced the earlier arrogance. I've worked for this company for 10 years. I have a family. I can't lose my job over one mistake. One mistake. Harrison's voice rose for the first time. You think what you did was one mistake? I've been sitting back there for the last hour watching you. I saw how you treated this woman and her son from the moment they boarded. I saw you serve drinks to every other passenger while deliberately ignoring them. I heard the way you spoke to her, the contempt in your voice, the thinly veiled racism in your words. And then you hit her child. A 3-year-old child. So no, this wasn't one mistake. This was a pattern of behavior that reveals exactly who you are. The other passengers were silent. Some looked ashamed. The woman in the cream suit stared at her lap. The older man who'd complained earlier suddenly found something fascinating about his phone screen. Marcus and Delilah stood in the galley entrance, and Marcus had tears streaming down his face. Harrison looked around at all of them. And the rest of you? You sat here and watched this happen. Some of you even encouraged it with your comments and complaints. You saw a mother trying her best with a scared child, and instead of offering compassion, you judged her. You decided she didn't belong here based on nothing more than the color of her skin. He let that sink in before continuing. I built this airline from nothing. I grew up poor. My mother cleaned houses for families who treated her like she was invisible. I know exactly what it feels like to be looked at like you're less than human, and I swore that if I ever had the power to make a difference, I would. So here's what's going to happen. Harrison pulled out his phone and made a call. This is Clark. I need you to arrange for police to meet us when we land at JFK. Yes, on the Atlanta to New York flight. There's been an incident. A flight attendant assaulted a passenger, a child. He paused, listening. I don't care if it causes delays. I want full documentation and I want charges pressed. And contact our legal department. I want them ready to support the family if they choose to pursue civil action. Yes, I'm serious. Get it done. He hung up and looked at Simone. Mom, if you want to press charges against her and file a lawsuit against the airline for emotional distress and the trauma your son experienced, my legal team will help you pro bono. You won't pay a cent for representation. Simone couldn't speak, couldn't process what was happening. This powerful man was offering to help her, a nobody nurse from Atlanta, who couldn't even afford this ticket without borrowing money. It didn't make sense. Why? She finally whispered. Why are you doing this? Harrison's expression softened again. Because it's the right thing to do. And because... He hesitated, then continued. Because, when I look at your son, I see myself 36 years ago. Different place, different situation, but the same scared little boy who didn't understand why people hated him for no reason. The plane continued flying toward New York while the cabin remained suspended in shocked silence. Bethany had been escorted to the crew area in the back by Marcus and Delilah, where she sat with her face in her hands, sobbing. Harrison had gently suggested that Simone and Elijah move to his more private seat toward the back of first class, away from the staring passengers. Shed agreed gratefully, and now they sat together while Elijah clung to his mother, the crying finally subsiding into exhausted hiccups. Harrison sat across the aisle, giving them space but staying close enough if they needed anything. Simone kept looking at him, trying to understand. Finally, she found her voice again. Mr. Clark, I'm grateful for everything you're doing, but I don't understand. You said Elijah was your son, but he's not. Why would you say that? Harrison leaned forward, elbows on his knees, choosing his words carefully. I said it because, in that moment, it was the fastest way to make her stop. People like Bethany respect power and consequences. If Id just said, stop hitting that child, she might have argued that she was doing her job. But the second she thought that child was connected to me, to someone with power over her career, she froze. It was a manipulation. Yes. But it was necessary. But you're risking your reputation, your company's reputation, by getting involved in this. My company's reputation. Harrison smiled sadly. My company's reputation should be based on how we treat people, especially the most vulnerable. If standing up for what's right damages our reputation, then we didn't deserve a good reputation in the first place. Simone studied his face. You said you see yourself in Elijah. Can you tell me what you meant? Harrison was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. Then he began to speak, his voice low and steady. I grew up in Chicago, in the Cabrini Green projects. My father wasn't in the picture. My mother, Elizabeth, worked 3 jobs to keep us fed and housed. She cleaned houses during the day, worked at a convenience store in the evening, and did laundry for a hotel at night. I barely saw her, but when I did, I could see how exhausted she was, how worn down. He paused, collecting himself. When I was 5 years old, she took me with her to one of the houses she cleaned. The family was rich, white, lived in this massive place in the suburbs. The mother of that family saw me standing in the foyer while my mom got her cleaning supplies, and she lost it. Started screaming that my mother had violated their agreement by bringing that boy into her house. Said I might steal something or break something or make a mess. My mother begged her to understand. Shed had no one to watch me that day. But the woman didn't care. She fired my mom on the spot. Simone's eyes filled with tears. That's horrible. It gets worse. As we were leaving, the woman's son, who was about 7, came down the stairs. He looked at me and said, "My mom says your kind ruins everything." He was 7 years old and had already learned to hate me. That's when I understood that racism isn't always shouted from rooftops. Sometimes it's whispered into children's ears until it becomes their truth. How did your mother handle it? She cried the whole bus ride home. Not because of the lost job, she could find another one, but because she felt like Shed failed to protect me from the ugliness of the world. I remember her holding me and saying, "Baby, you're going to grow up and be someone important. You're going to be so important that people like her will have to treat you with respect, whether they want to or not." Harrison's voice roughened with emotion. She died when I was 19. Heart attack. Probably from working herself to death trying to give me a chance at a better life. I never got to show her what I became. Never got to give her the easy life she deserved. Simone reached across the aisle and touched his hand. She knew. Mothers always know. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Simone spoke again. "I'm flying to New York because my mother is dying. Cancer. The doctors say she has maybe a week left. I borrowed money from 3 people to buy this ticket because there were no economy seats left. This is my first time in first class, and I was so nervous about it, worried that people would judge us, that Elijah would do something wrong, and then everything I was afraid of happened." "None of this is your fault," Harrison said firmly. "You did nothing wrong. Your son did nothing wrong. You were targeted from the moment you stepped on this plane because Bethany made assumptions about who you were based on your skin color. That's on her, not you. But Elijah did spill the water. That latest suit really is expensive." And he was crying so loud. Has 3 years old. 3-year-olds cry. 3-year-olds have accidents. That's universal, regardless of race. But a white child would have been met with patience and understanding. Your son was met with hostility and violence. Do you see the difference? Simone nodded slowly. Shed, always known racism existed, had experienced it herself in smaller ways throughout her life. But seeing it directed at her innocent child, seeing someone actually hurt him, had shattered something inside her. What happens now? Now, we make sure this never happens to anyone else. Harrison pulled out his phone again. "I'm going to have my team meet us at the airport. Well, get Elijah checked by a doctor to document the injury. Well, file a police report. And then we're going to have a very serious conversation about what Skylux Airline stands for." As he spoke, Delilah approached cautiously from the galley. "Mr. Clark? I'm so sorry to interrupt, but may I speak with you for a moment?" Harrison nodded, and she sat down in the empty seat next to him, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. "Sir, I need to tell you that this isn't the first time Bethany has said or done inappropriate things. Marcus and I have both heard her make racist comments before. We reported it to our supervisor 6 months ago, but nothing was done. We were told that unless a passenger complained, there was nothing to investigate." Harrison's jaw tightened. "Give me the name of that supervisor." "Paul Henderson. Has the regional manager for flight crews." "Not anymore." Harrison typed something into his phone. "Anyone who knew about this behavior and did nothing is complicit. They're all done." Delilah's eyes widened. "Sir, I don't want to cost people their jobs. You didn't cost them anything. Their choices cost them their jobs. You did the right thing by reporting it. The failure was in the people above you who ignored it. He looked at her seriously. How many other flight attendants have similar complaints that were ignored? I don't know for sure, but there are rumors. Stories people share in the break room about difficult passengers, and sometimes the way they describe those passengers, the language they use, it's not right. Harrison stood up. I need you to do something for me. When we land, I want you to write down everything you remember. Every incident, every complaint that was ignored, every person who should have acted but didn't. Can you do that? Yes, sir. Thank you for your courage in speaking up. That takes guts. He turned to Simone. I'm going to walk through the cabin and speak with the other passengers. Some of them witnessed everything. I want their statements too. Will you be okay here? Simone nodded. Elijah had fallen asleep against her shoulder, exhausted from crying. She stroked his hair gently, her heart breaking for what Head endured. Harrison walked slowly through first class, stopping at each row. He spoke quietly to the woman in the cream suit, whose expensive outfit had been splashed with water. Mom, I'm Harrison Clark, CEO of this airline. I'd like to know if you plan to seek compensation for your damaged clothing. The woman wouldn't meet his eyes. No, that's not necessary. It was an accident. The child didn't mean to do it. That's correct. He didn't. So I hope you'll reconsider how you reacted in the moment. She nodded miserably. I'm sorry. I said things I shouldn't have said. I was frustrated, but that's no excuse. Harrison moved on. The older white man who'd complained about children in first class also apologized when approached. I'm ashamed of myself, he admitted. My grandson is about that boy's age. If someone had hit him like that, I'd want them arrested. But I sat here and watched it happen to someone else's child and didn't say a word because he trailed off. Because he was black, Harrison finished. Yes, that's exactly why. And that needs to change. By the time Harrison returned to his seat, Head collected contact information from 8 passengers willing to give statements. Most had expressed remorse for their inaction. A few had defended their silence by saying they didn't think it was their place to intervene. Harrison had politely but firmly told them that it's always your place to intervene when you witness injustice. As he sat back down, the captain's voice came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our descent into New York. Please return to your seats and ensure your seatbelts are fastened. Simone gently woke Elijah. The little boy stirred, then winced as he touched his face. The handprint had darkened to an angry bruise. Simona's eyes filled with fresh tears, but she forced herself to stay calm for his sake. Almost there, baby, just a little bit longer. Harrison leaned across the aisle. There's going to be a lot of people at the airport. Police, my staff, possibly reporters. If word got out, I know you're trying to get to your mother. I'll have a car waiting to take you directly to the hospital as soon as we're done with what needs to be documented. Okay, thank you, Simone whispered. Thank you for everything. You don't need to thank me. This is basic human decency. The fact that it feels exceptional says everything about how far we still have to go as a society. The plane touched down smoothly. As it taxied to the gate, Bethany remained isolated in the crew area, her career and reputation in ruins. Marcus stood guard at the door, his arms crossed, his expression grim. Head spent the flight thinking about all the times Head stayed silent when he should have spoken up. All the times Head witnessed subtle and not-so-subtle racism and told himself it wasn't his problem. Never again. Head decided that right then and there. Never again. When the plane finally stopped at the gate, Harrison stood up. Ladies and gentlemen, I need everyone to remain seated for a few minutes while we handle an official matter. Thank you for your patience. 2 police officers boarded the plane, followed by 3 members of Harrison's executive team. Bethany was brought out from the crew area, her face blotchy from crying, her hands shaking. One of the officers asked Harrison to explain what had happened. He did, his voice steady and factual. Then he turned to Simone. "This is Simone Washington and her son Elijah. They're the victims." One of the officers, a black woman in her 40s, knelt down to Elijah's level. "Hi there, sweetheart. My name is Officer Jenkins. Can you tell me what happened on the airplane? Did someone hurt you?" Elijah looked at his mother, who nodded encouragingly. In a small voice, he said, "The airplane lady was mean. She yelled at Mama. Then she hit me. It hurt." Officer Jenkins' expression hardened. She stood up and looked at Bethany. "Mom, you're under arrest for assault. You have the right to remain silent." As the officer read Bethany her rights and led her off the plane in handcuffs, the passengers watched in stunned silence. This had started as a routine flight and had turned into something none of them would ever forget. Some of them pulled out their phones and started recording. By the time the plane emptied, multiple videos from multiple angles were already uploading to social media. JFK Airport had seen a lot of drama over the years, but the scene at Gate B-14 was unprecedented. News crews had somehow gotten word of what happened and were set up at the end of the jetway, cameras ready. Airport security had to form a perimeter to keep them back. Harrison's legal team consisted of 4 lawyers in expensive suits, all carrying briefcases and tablet computers, moving with the efficient precision of people who'd done this before. A doctor from the airport medical clinic stood ready to examine Elijah. Harrison coordinated everything like a general commanding troops. Had built an empire by being decisive and strategic, and those skills were on full display now. "Dr. Martinez, please examine the child and document all injuries. Make sure you photograph everything. Linda," he turned to one of his lawyers, "I want you with Miss Washington at all times. If the police need to interview her, you're present. If reporters try to approach her, you handle it." "Understood." "Yes, sir." "Thompson, I want you at the police station with the arresting officers. Make sure everything is filed correctly. I want charges for assault on a minor, and any other charges that apply. And I want it clear that we're cooperating fully with the investigation." "On it." "Rodriguez, contact every news outlet that's here. Tell them I'll give a statement in 30 minutes. Not before. I want time to make sure Miss Washington and her son are taken care of first." The machine that was Harrison's business empire had kicked into high gear. But in the middle of all this corporate efficiency and legal maneuvering, Harrison hadn't forgotten the human element. He walked over to where Simone sat with Elijah, while Dr. Martinez examined the boy's face. "How is he, doctor?" Dr. Martinez looked up, her expression grave. Significant bruising across the left cheek and jaw. Some swelling. No broken bones, which is fortunate, but the force was substantial. "This will hurt for several days. I'm going to recommend over-the-counter pain medication and ice packs. I'm also going to recommend that he see a child psychologist. The physical injury will heal, but the emotional trauma might last longer." Harrison nodded. He looked at Simone. "My team will cover all medical expenses. Therapy, medication, whatever he needs. And I meant what I said about the car to the hospital. It's waiting outside right now. One of my assistants will go with you to make sure you get there safely." Simone's composure finally cracked. She'd been holding it together for Elijah's sake, but the kindness and support from this stranger who had no obligation to help her was overwhelming. She started crying, and Harrison handed her a handkerchief from his pocket. "I don't know how to repay you for this." "You don't repay kindness. You pass it forward when you can." He squeezed her shoulder gently. "Go see your mother. Be with her. My team will handle everything else. When you're ready, In a few days or a week. Well, sit down and talk about next steps. But right now, family comes first. Simone hugged him impulsively, and Harrison returned the embrace. Over her shoulder, he saw his legal team watching with barely concealed surprise. Their CEO was not known for being emotionally demonstrative, but then again, they'd never seen him deal with something that hit this close to home. A young woman in a professional pantsuit approached. "Miss Washington? My name is Angela. I'm Mr. Clark's personal assistant. I have a car waiting to take you to which hospital?" "Mount Sinai," Simone said, wiping her eyes. "My mother is in the ICU. Well, have you there in 20 minutes. I've also taken the liberty of calling ahead to let them know you're coming." Angela's efficiency was comforting in its own way. She took Elijah's hand gently. "Come on, sweetie. Let's get you to your grandma." As they walked away, Elijah turned back and waved at Harrison. The CEO waved back, his throat tight with emotion. Then he turned to face the wall of cameras and reporters waiting for him. He walked out into the terminal, and immediately the questions started flying. "Mr. Clark, is it true one of your flight attendants assaulted a child? Can you confirm the victim was a black toddler? Is this a case of racial discrimination? Will you be firing the employee involved?" Harrison held up his hand, and the reporters quieted down. Had always had that effect on people, a natural authority that commanded attention. He looked directly into the cameras. "My name is Harrison Clark. I'm the founder and CEO of Skylux Airlines. Today, on one of our flights, I personally witnessed an employee commit an act of violence against a 3-year-old child. I witnessed that same employee engage in clear racial discrimination against the child's mother from the moment they boarded. And I witnessed a system failure that allowed this employee to maintain such prejudices despite previous complaints against her." He paused, letting that sink in. The cameras were rolling, recording every word. This would be on every news channel within the hour. Good. He wanted it everywhere. "The employee, Bethany Caldwell, has been terminated immediately and is currently under arrest. She will face the full consequences of her actions, both criminal and civil. But more than that, I'm announcing today that Skylux Airlines will undergo a complete review of our hiring practices, training protocols, and complaint procedures. We will be implementing mandatory anti-racism training for every single employee, from flight attendants to executives. We will be creating an anonymous reporting system so employees can report discrimination without fear of retaliation. And we will be donating $1 million to organizations that fight against racial injustice." A reporter called out, "Some people are saying you're only doing this because you happen to be on the flight. What do you say to that?" "I say they're right. I was only able to intervene because I was there. But how many times has something like this happened when I wasn't there? How many passengers have been mistreated, discriminated against, or harassed, and no one with power stepped in? That's what we need to fix. Not just on my airline, but across the entire industry." "Why did you tell the flight attendant the child was your son when he wasn't?" Harrison smiled grimly. "Because I knew that the fastest way to stop her was to make her understand there would be consequences. She didn't care about hurting that child, but she cared about hurting the CEO's son. That tells you everything you need to know about how power and privilege work in our society. And that's what we're going to change." The press conference went on for another 20 minutes. Harrison answered every question honestly, refused to deflect or minimize what had happened, and made it clear that this was personal for him. Finally, he wrapped it up. "I need to get back to work. There's a lot to do, but I want to end by saying this. If you witness injustice, speak up. If you see discrimination, intervene. If you have power, use it to protect those who don't. That's how we make the world better. One action at a time. Thank you." As he walked away from the cameras, his chief legal counsel caught up with him. "Boss, That was a hell of a statement. The board is going to have opinions about the $1 million donation. The board can have all the opinions they want. I'm still the majority shareholder. The donation stands. Some people are going to say you're being too political. Then they can fly someone else's airline. I'm not going to stay silent about racism because it might hurt our stock price. They walked through the terminal together, heading toward the Skylux executive offices that were housed in a building adjacent to the airport. Harrison's phone was blowing up with calls and texts. He ignored all of them for now. There was one more thing he needed to do today. He called his head of HR into his office an hour later. Paul Henderson, the regional manager Hode, ignored complaints about Bethany, was already there, waiting, looking nervous. "Paul," Harrison said without preamble. "You're fired." "Sir, I can explain." "Explain what?" "That you received complaints about an employee engaging in racist behavior and you did nothing? That you told the people reporting to you that without a passenger complaint, there was nothing to investigate? That you enabled this situation through your inaction?" Paul's face went red. "I was following company policy. We can't fire someone just because of rumors." "They weren't rumors. They were concerns raised by other employees. And company policy is about to change drastically. You're done. Security will escort you out. Your employment contract will be sent to you tomorrow, and you'll be hearing from our legal team about your role in creating a hostile work environment." After Paul was escorted out, Harrison turned to his HR director. "I want a full audit of every complaint filed in the last 5 years that was dismissed without investigation. I want to know how many other Bethanys we have working for us. And I want them all gone." "Sir, if we fire everyone who's ever made an inappropriate comment, we might be looking at dozens of terminations." "Then so be it. I'd rather have an airline with fewer employees and better values than an airline that puts profits over human dignity." As the sun set over New York, Harrison sat in his office and thought about Simone and Elijah. He hoped they'd made it to the hospital in time. He hoped Simone's mother would hold on long enough for them to say goodbye. He hoped that little boy would heal from the trauma of what Head experienced today, and he vowed that he would do everything in his power to make sure nothing like this ever happened on his airline again. By the next morning, the story had exploded across every form of media. The hashtag Justice for Elijah was trending worldwide on social media. News channels played the footage on loop, the sound of that slap echoing through millions of homes. Cell phone videos from passengers showed Bethany's arrest, her face hidden as she was led off the plane in handcuffs. Harrison's press conference had been viewed over 20 million times. Public reaction was swift and divided. The majority of people praised Harrison for taking immediate action and using his power to protect a vulnerable family. Comments poured in from people sharing their own experiences with racism, discrimination, and being treated as less than human because of their skin color. Black mothers posted pictures of their own children with captions like, "This could have been my baby." Parents of all races expressed horror that someone could hit a child. But there was also backlash. Certain news commentators questioned whether Harrison had overreacted. "It was just a tap," one conservative pundit argued. "We've become too sensitive. In my day, flight attendants kept order on planes, and nobody complained." Some people defended Bethany, claiming she'd been driven to her breaking point by an uncontrollable child. Online trolls sent death threats to Simone, whose name and face had been revealed when someone dug through public records. Harrison had his team monitoring everything. He wanted to know what people were saying, what arguments were being made, what narratives were forming. Because this wasn't just about one incident anymore. It had become a flashpoint in the national conversation about race, power, and accountability. His phone rang. It was one of his board members, Chester Morrison, a 65-year-old white man who'd been with the company since the early days. "Harrison, we need to talk about the fallout from yesterday." "What fallout?" "Our stock dropped 3 points this morning." Some of our corporate clients are questioning whether they want to be associated with controversy. And I've had several major investors call me concerned about your $1 million donation pledge." Harrison's voice was ice cold. "Chester, let me be very clear. I don't care about the stock price. I don't care about corporate clients who think standing against racism is controversial, and the donation is happening whether the investors like it or not. If anyone wants to pull their money because we have a moral backbone, let them. You're being emotional about this. I understand it's personal for you because of your background. But as CEO, you need to think about the company first." I am thinking about the company. I'm thinking about what kind of company we want to be. Do we want to be known as the airline that allowed racism to flourish? Or do we want to be known as the airline that took a stand? I know which one I choose. The board is meeting tomorrow to discuss this. Some of them want to distance the company from your statements. Then some of them can resign. I'm not backing down, Chester. Not on this. He hung up and immediately got another call. This one was from Simone. His heart jumped. "Miss Washington? Is everything okay?" Her voice was heavy with grief. "My mother passed away this morning. She held on long enough for us to get here, and then she was gone. But I wanted to call and thank you. Because of you, I got to say goodbye. Because of the car you sent. Because of how quickly everything was arranged. I made it in time. You'll never forget that. I'm so sorry for your loss." Harrison's throat tightened. He thought about his own mother, about not being able to save her, about all the goodbyes he'd never gotten. "Take all the time you need. Don't worry about anything else right now. Just be with your family. There's something else I need to tell you. The hospital here, they're being amazing. The staff found out what happened on the plane, and they've been so kind to Elijah. One of the nurses is a child psychologist, and she's been talking to him, making sure he's processing everything. She says he's resilient, but he'll need ongoing therapy. Whatever he needs, well, make sure he gets it. Mr. Clark." "Harrison, why are you doing all this? You don't know us. We're nobody to you. You're not nobody. You're human beings who deserved better than what you got. And I have the power to help, so I'm helping. That's all there is to it." After they hung up, Harrison sat in his office and stared out the window at the New York skyline. He thought about power and responsibility. He thought about all the people who had power over him when he was young, and how most of them had used it to keep him down. He'd vowed that when he had power, he'd use it differently. His assistant knocked on the door. "Sir, there's someone here to see you. She says it's urgent." "Who?" "Bethany Caldwell's mother." Harrison's eyebrows rose. "Send her in." The woman who entered was in her 60s, thin and tired looking, her hands twisting a purse strap nervously. "Mr. Clark, I'm Barbara Caldwell. I'm Bethany's mother. I know you probably don't want to see me, but I had to come." "Sit down, Mrs. Caldwell." She perched on the edge of the chair like a bird ready to flee. "My daughter is in jail. She's been charged with assault. She's going to lose everything. Her job, her reputation, probably her freedom." Tears ran down her face. "I know what she did was wrong. I'm not here to make excuses. But I needed you to understand something." "What's that?" "She learned it from me." Barbara's voice broke. "The way she thinks about people who are different from her, the prejudice, the fear. I taught her that. Not deliberately, not by sitting her down and saying hate black people, but through 1,000 small moments. The way it'd clutch my purse tighter when a black man walked by. The way it'd talk about those neighborhoods and those people like they were something dangerous. She absorbed it all like a sponge. And by the time I realized what I'd done, it was too late." Harrison studied her. There was genuine remorse in her eyes. but also something else. Desperation. Are you asking me to help her? No. She deserves what she gets. But I'm asking you to use what happened as an example. Show other parents what hatred does. Show them how easily it gets passed down. Because there are millions of mothers out there like me, teaching their children to be afraid or disgusted by people who look different. And if we don't break that cycle, nothing will ever change. Harrison was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You're right. Thank you for having the courage to come here and say that. I'll make sure your message gets heard." After she left, Harrison felt emotionally drained. It was barely noon, and had already had more intense conversations than most people have in a month. But there was no time to rest. The news cycle was still churning, and he needed to stay ahead of it. His PR director came in with a laptop. "Boss, you need to see this. Someone started a GoFundMe for Simone and Elijah. It's already raised over $200,000. Harrison pulled up the page. The description read, "This family has suffered enough. Let's show them that the world has more love than hate." Thousands of people had donated, leaving comments of support and solidarity. Many shared their own stories of discrimination. It was both heartbreaking and beautiful. "Make sure someone reaches out to whoever started this," Harrison said. "I want to match the total amount raised dollar for dollar. Whatever they get, well, double it." "Sir, you're already paying for their legal fees and medical expenses. I don't care." "Do it." As the day wore on, more developments came in. The police investigation revealed that Bethany had a history of complaints from neighbors and acquaintances, all following the same pattern. Shed called the police on a black family at a park because their children were too loud. Shed filed a noise complaint against her Hispanic neighbors, claiming they were having parties every night when surveillance footage showed they weren't. Shed even tried to have a black delivery driver banned from her building because he looked suspicious. A lawyer from Harrison's team brought him the full file. "She's a serial racist, boss. This wasn't a one-time loss of control. This is who she is. Make sure all of this gets shared with the prosecutor. I want them to have the full picture when they're deciding on charges." Meanwhile, at Skylux headquarters, the promised review was underway. HR was interviewing every employee, asking about experiences with discrimination, both as victims and witnesses. The results were disturbing. Out of 3,000 employees, over 200 reported having witnessed or experienced discriminatory behavior that had never been properly addressed. 47 employees were flagged for immediate investigation based on multiple corroborating complaints. Harrison called an emergency company-wide meeting that evening. Every employee across all locations joined via video conference. Thousands of faces filled the screen. Harrison looked at all of them and felt the weight of responsibility. "I founded this airline 20 years ago with a simple mission: to make travel accessible and enjoyable for everyone. Everyone. Not just the wealthy, not just white people. Everyone. But somewhere along the way, we lost sight of that. We allowed a culture to develop where discrimination was tolerated as long as it was quiet, where complaints were ignored if they seemed inconvenient, where power protected prejudice." He paused, letting his words sink in. "That ends today. From this moment forward, there is zero tolerance for racism, sexism, homophobia, or any other form of discrimination at Skylux Airlines. If you engage in it, you're fired. If you witness it and don't report it, you're complicit. If you're in management and you ignore reports, you're done. Is that clear?" Thousands of heads nodded on the screen. But Harrison also saw some faces that looked angry, resistant. Good. Let them be angry. Let them quit if they couldn't handle treating people with basic respect. "We're going to make mistakes as we implement these changes. We're going to have hard conversations. Some of you are going to be uncomfortable because you'll have to examine your own biases. But discomfort is part of growth. And we're going to grow together, or we're going to fail. He'd rather fail trying to do the right thing than succeed by doing the wrong thing. The meeting ended with mixed reactions. Some employees sent messages of support and gratitude. Others sent complaints about political correctness and reverse discrimination. Harrison responded to none of them. Head said what needed to be said. Now it was time for action. As midnight approached and Harrison finally left his office to go home, he received one more call. It was from Simone again. "I'm sorry to bother you so late," she said, "but I couldn't sleep, and I needed to tell you something. Today, while we were at the hospital, Elijah was playing with some toys in the waiting room. A little white boy came over and asked if he could play too. And Elijah said yes without even thinking about it. No hesitation, no fear, no prejudice, just kindness." Her voice cracked with emotion. After everything that happened yesterday, after being hit by someone who hated him for no reason, he still has the capacity to be kind. And I realized that's what we're fighting for. Not just justice for what happened to us, but to protect that innocence in all children. To make sure they grow up in a world where kindness is the default, not the exception. Harrison felt tears prick his eyes. He sounds like an amazing kid. He is. And you helped save him. Not just from that woman, but from losing faith in people. Because you showed him that there are good people in the world who will stand up for what's right. Thank you, Harrison. Thank you for being one of those people. After they hung up, Harrison stood at his window, looking out at the city that never sleeps. Somewhere out there, Bethany sat in a jail cell, contemplating the ruins of her life. Somewhere out there, thousands of people were having conversations about race and privilege and justice. And somewhere out there, a 3-year-old boy was sleeping peacefully, still innocent, despite everything. Still capable of kindness. Tomorrow would bring more challenges, more backlash, more work to be done. But tonight, Harrison allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they were making a difference. 3 weeks later, the investigation into Bethany and the systemic issues at Skylux Airlines was complete. The findings were damning. The independent firm Harrison had hired to audit the company had uncovered a pattern of discrimination complaints being systematically dismissed or downplayed by middle management. They'd found evidence that certain managers actively discouraged employees from reporting incidents, warning them it would be career suicide to make waves. The report recommended terminating 23 employees for direct acts of discrimination and 7 managers for enabling a hostile work environment. Harrison approved every single one. The terminations happened on the same day, all at once, sending shockwaves through the company. But he also made sure that the employees who'd tried to report problems and been silenced received public commendations and promotions. The story stayed in the news cycle because Bethany's trial became a spectacle. Her lawyers tried to argue that she'd been under stress, that the child had been disruptive, that Shed only tapped him to get his attention. But the video evidence was clear. Multiple angles showed the force of the slap, the red mark it left, the child's traumatized reaction. Character witnesses came forward, including neighbors, former co-workers, and even her ex-husband, all describing a pattern of racist behavior going back years. The prosecution presented text messages from Bethany's phone, where Shed used racial slurs casually in conversations with friends. They showed social media posts where Shed complained about diversity hires and quotas ruining her workplace. They brought in expert witnesses who explained how implicit and explicit bias translated into discriminatory actions. The defense tried to paint her as a victim of political correctness, someone who'd made one mistake and was being destroyed by an overzealous mob. But the evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning a guilty verdict on assault charges. Bethany was sentenced to 18 months in prison, 3 years probation, and mandatory counseling for her racist beliefs. In her final statement before sentencing, Bethany stood before the court with her lawyer beside her. She looked older, thinner, broken. "I want to apologize to Elijah and his mother for what I did. I was wrong. I let my prejudices control my actions, and I hurt an innocent child. I'm ashamed of myself. I'm ashamed of the person I was." Some people believed her remorse was genuine. Others thought she was just sorry she'd been caught. Harrison, watching from the back of the courtroom, wasn't sure which it was. Maybe it didn't matter. What mattered was that actions had consequences, and that message needed to be clear. But the story didn't end with Bethany's conviction. Because while she was the most visible face of the problem, she was far from the only one. The national conversation her case sparked had rippled through the airline industry and beyond. Other airlines started reviewing their own policies. Stories emerged of similar incidents that had been swept under the rug. Employees across multiple companies came forward with complaints they'd been too afraid to voice before. Harrison used his platform to push for industry-wide reform. He testified before Congress about the need for federal regulations requiring anti-discrimination training and independent oversight of complaint procedures. He worked with civil rights organizations to develop best practices. He partnered with universities to research implicit bias in customer service industries. Some people accused him of grandstanding, of using tragedy for publicity. But Harrison didn't care. He knew his motives, and he knew the impact his actions were having. Within 6 months, 4 major airlines had implemented new policies directly modeled on what Skylux had done. Within a year, legislation was introduced in Congress requiring standardized anti-discrimination protocols across the entire transportation industry. Meanwhile, Simone and Elijah were trying to rebuild their lives. The money from the GoFundMe, matched by Harrison's donation, had eliminated all her debt and given her a financial cushion for the first time in her life. She was able to take time off work to grieve her mother and focus on Elijah's therapy. The child psychologist working with him reported that he was processing the trauma well, though he was afraid of airplanes now. Harrison had kept in touch with them regularly, checking in, making sure they had everything they needed. And the more he talked to Simone, the more he admired her strength and grace. She could have been bitter, angry, vengeful. Instead, she channeled her pain into advocacy, speaking at schools and community centers about racism and how to teach children to recognize and resist it. One evening, 6 months after the incident, Harrison invited Simone and Elijah to dinner at his penthouse apartment. It was the first time they'd seen each other in person since the airport, though they'd talked on the phone and video chatted many times. Elijah was nervous at first, clinging to his mother's hand. But Harrison's home was warm and welcoming, and Head made sure to have age-appropriate toys and books available. They ate together, talking about everything and nothing. Harrison told stories about building his company, about the mistakes Head made, about the lessons Head learned. Simone shared memories of her mother, laughing and crying as she described the woman who'd raised her to be strong and compassionate. Elijah, gradually warming up, showed Harrison a picture Head drawn at school. "It's an airplane," Elijah explained, "but it's a nice airplane. With nice people, like you." Harrison felt his throat tighten. "That's a beautiful picture. Can I keep it?" Elijah nodded solemnly and handed it over. Harrison carefully set it on his refrigerator with a magnet. Then he knelt down to Elijah's level. "Can I tell you something important?" The boy nodded. "What happened to you on that airplane should never have happened. That lady was wrong to hurt you, and I'm sorry that happened. But I want you to know something else. You are smart, you are kind, and you are worthy of respect. Always." Don't ever let anyone make you feel small because of who you are. Okay, okay. Elijah thought for a moment. Are you my friend? I'd be honored to be your friend. Elijah hugged him spontaneously, and Harrison hugged back, careful and gentle. Over the boy's shoulder, he saw Simone wiping tears from her eyes. After Elijah went to play with toys in the living room, Simone and Harrison sat in the kitchen drinking coffee. You didn't have to do all this, she said. The donations, the legal support, staying involved with us. You could have walked away after that day. I could have, but I didn't want to. You and Elijah, you remind me why I do what I do, why I built this company. It wasn't for money or power. It was to prove that someone like me, someone from where I came from, could succeed. And now that I have succeeded, I have a responsibility to use that success to help others. You've changed our lives. You know that, right? Not just financially. You gave me hope that the world can be better, that there are people who will stand up when it matters. Harrison smiled. You would have been fine without me. You're one of the strongest people I've ever met. I didn't feel strong when that woman was yelling at me, and I couldn't do anything to protect my son. But you did protect him. You held him. You comforted him. You got him to safety, and then you didn't let that moment define you. You turned it into something positive. That's real strength. They talked late into the night, and as Harrison watched Simone and Elijah eventually leave, heading down to the car Head arranged to take them home safely, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. Head done the right thing, and Head followed through. His mother would have been proud. But the next morning brought an unexpected twist. Harrison's assistant burst into his office with urgent news. Boss, you need to see this. The investigative team found something while going through old employee records for the audit. What? Simone Washington's mother, Lorraine Washington, worked for Skylux 25 years ago. She was a contract cleaner. And there's a note in her file from the HR manager at the time. It says she refused payment for 1 month because she'd heard that the company was struggling financially, and she wanted to help. The note says she specifically asked that any money she would have been paid should go toward providing scholarships for employees' children who wanted to go to college. Harrison's world tilted. What? The assistant pulled up the file on her tablet and showed him. There was a photo attached to the employee record. A younger version of the woman Harrison had only seen briefly in a hospital bed, unconscious, just before she died. But it was unmistakably Simone's mother. Harrison sat down slowly, his mind racing. She helped us when we needed it. 25 years ago, when I was barely keeping the company afloat, when I was working 100-hour weeks and couldn't afford to pay employees sometimes, she gave up her salary to help. Not just that, the assistant pulled up another document. She anonymously donated to the scholarship fund every month for 3 years until she had to leave the company because her own mother got sick and she had to move to Atlanta to take care of her. The scholarship she helped fund. Boss. It paid for Marcus' training. Remember Marcus, the flight attendant who tried to stop Bethany? Harrison couldn't speak. The circle was complete in a way that seemed impossible. Cosmic. The woman whose daughter had protected his company decades ago. The scholarship she'd funded had trained the employee who'd tried to intervene on her grandson's behalf. He called Simone immediately. I need you to come to my office. There's something I have to show you. An hour later, Simone sat across from him, staring at the old employee files, the photos, the records of her mother's donations. Tears streamed down her face. I never knew she did this. She never told me. She was an extraordinary person. And now I understand where you get your strength from. Simone looked up at him. All this time, I thought you were helping us out of pure kindness. But maybe Maybe the universe brought us back together for a reason. To close a circle. To honor her memory. Harrison came around the desk and sat beside her. Your mother gave my company a chance to survive when we had nothing. She believed in us when she didn't have to. And 25 years later, I got to help her family in their time of need. Maybe you're right. Maybe it was meant to be. They sat together in silence, both thinking about the invisible threads that connect people across time and space, about how one act of kindness can echo through decades, about how the good we put into the world has a way of coming back, sometimes when we need it most. 1 year after the incident on Flight 723, Skylux Airlines looked completely different. The company had implemented comprehensive anti-discrimination training for all employees, created an independent oversight board to investigate complaints, and established a scholarship program for children from underprivileged backgrounds who wanted to pursue careers in aviation. The scholarship was named the Lorraine Washington Memorial Scholarship, and it had already awarded full rides to 15 students. The company's reputation had taken a hit initially, but recovered stronger than before. Customers appreciated the transparency and accountability. Many people specifically chose to fly Skylux because they wanted to support a company that had taken a stand. The stock price had fully rebounded and then exceeded previous highs. The board members who'd been worried about profits had to admit that doing the right thing had been good for business too. Harrison stood at the podium during the scholarship award ceremony, looking out at the audience. Simone sat in the front row with Elijah, now 4 years old and thriving. Marcus, the flight attendant, who had tried to stop Bethany, was there too, recently promoted to lead trainer for customer service. Delilah sat beside him, having been promoted to regional supervisor. We're here today to honor the memory of Lorraine Washington, Harrison began. A woman who embodied everything this company should stand for: compassion, integrity, service. She helped us when we needed it most, asking for nothing in return. And now, we have the privilege of helping young people in her name. He called up the scholarship recipients, one by one. 15 students from diverse backgrounds, all with dreams of working in aviation. Some wanted to be pilots, some wanted to be engineers. One wanted to be a CEO like Harrison. Each received a full scholarship, covering tuition, books, and living expenses for 4 years of college. After the ceremony, there was a reception. People mingled, sharing stories, making connections. Harrison watched it all with satisfaction. This was what success looked like. Not stock prices or quarterly earnings, but people's lives being changed for the better. Simone approached him with Elijah at her side. The boy had grown taller, his smile bright and confident. The fear that had haunted him after the incident had gradually faded through therapy and the consistent love of his mother and the expanding circle of people who cared about him. He wanted to give you something, Simone said. Elijah held out a handmade card. On the front, had drawn an airplane with the Skylux logo. Inside, in careful preschool handwriting aided by his mother's hand, it said, "Thank you for being my friend. Love, Elijah." Harrison knelt down and hugged the boy. "Thank you, buddy. I'll treasure this. Mama says you're a hero." Elijah said seriously, "Is that true?" Harrison smiled. "I'm not a hero. I just did what was right. But you know what? You're a hero too." "I am. Absolutely. You were brave when scary things happened. You stayed kind even when someone was mean to you. And you're making the world better just by being yourself. That's what heroes do." Elijah beamed and ran off to play with some of the other children at the reception. Simone and Harrison stood together, watching him. "He doesn't remember it much anymore," Simone said quietly. "The therapist says that's common with young children. The memory fades. But I remember. I'll always remember what you did for us. What we did together, Harrison corrected. You had the courage to speak up. You had the strength to turn trauma into advocacy. I just had the platform. Where do you think we'd be now if you hadn't been on that plane? Harrison considered the question. I think you would have found another way forward. You're a survivor. But I'm glad I was there. I'm glad I could help. And I'm glad we've stayed connected. Over the past year, their relationship had evolved into genuine friendship. Harrison was like an uncle to Elijah, present for birthdays and holidays. Had helped Simone find a better-paying position at a private hospital with excellent benefits. Shed helped him understand perspectives he'd never considered, challenged his assumptions, made him a better leader. They'd both grown from knowing each other. As the reception wound down, Harrison's assistant approached with a reminder about his next meeting. He groaned. Back to work. No rest for the CEO. Simone laughed. Go change the world some more. Well, see you Sunday for dinner. Right. I'll be there. Tell Elijah I'm bringing ice cream. You're going to spoil him. That's what honorary uncles are for. As Harrison left the event and headed back to his office, he thought about the journey that had led him here. From a poor kid in Chicago to the CEO of a major airline. From a victim of discrimination to someone with the power to fight against it. The circle had closed in ways he never could have imagined. He thought about Bethany, serving time in prison, hopefully learning and growing from her mistakes. He thought about all the employees who'd been fired for their discriminatory behavior, their careers over because they'd refused to treat people with basic respect. He didn't take pleasure in their downfall, but he didn't regret it either. Actions have consequences. He thought about all the passengers from that flight. Many had reached out to him afterward to apologize for their silence, promising to be braver next time. Some had become activists in their own communities, using what they'd witnessed as a catalyst for change. Even the woman in the cream suit had donated a significant amount to racial justice organizations, trying to make amends for her part in the incident. And he thought about Simone and Elijah, about how their lives had been forever altered by one terrible moment that had been transformed into something meaningful. The trauma would always be part of their story, but it didn't define them. They'd chosen hope over bitterness, action over victimhood, forgiveness over hatred. As Harrison sat at his desk and looked at the drawing Elijah had given him all those months ago, still hanging on his refrigerator, transported now to his office wall, he felt a profound sense of purpose. This was why Head built this company. This was why Head fought so hard to succeed, so that when moments like that flight arrived, Head have the power to make a difference. 3 years later, the story had become legend within the aviation industry. The flight that changed everything was how people referred to it. Business schools taught it as a case study in corporate responsibility. Training programs used it as an example of how to handle crises with integrity. And children's books were written about a little boy who encountered hatred but was saved by kindness. Elijah was 7 now, thriving in school, loved and protected. He wanted to be a pilot when he grew up, and Harrison had promised to help make that dream come true. Simone had gone back to school, earning her degree in public health, and now ran a non-profit organization focused on combating racism in healthcare settings. She traveled the country giving talks, sharing their story, inspiring others to speak up and take action. Harrison had stepped back from day-to-day operations of Skylux to focus on advocacy work full-time. The airline ran smoothly under new leadership that shared his values. He spent his days working with legislators, meeting with activists, funding initiatives, and using his wealth and influence to push for systemic change. And through it all, the 3 of them stayed connected: Simone, Elijah, and Harrison. An unlikely family formed through trauma and transformed by love. They celebrated holidays together, vacationed together, supported each other through life's challenges. The bond forged on that terrible day had become unbreakable. On the anniversary of Lorraine's death, They visited her grave together. Elijah placed flowers on the headstone, while Harrison and Simone stood with their arms around each other. "She'd be so proud of you," Harrison said quietly. "She'd be proud of all of us." Simone replied, "She'd say we took the worst day and made something beautiful from it." Elijah looked up at them. "Grandma's in heaven, right?" "Yes, baby. Do you think she knows what happened? That Mr. Harrison helped us." Simone smiled through tears. "I think she knows, and I think she brought him into our lives for a reason." Harrison thought about that moment on the plane when Head stood up. When Head made the choice to intervene rather than stay silent. It would have been easy to turn away, to tell himself it wasn't his problem. But Head learned long ago that silence in the face of injustice is itself a form of injustice. And Head vowed never to be silent. That single moment of courage had rippled outward in ways he never could have predicted. Lives changed, policies reformed, conversations started, hearts opened. All because someone with power chose to use it for good. As they walked away from the cemetery, Elijah reached up and took Harrison's hand on one side and his mother's hand on the other. 3 people, different backgrounds, different stories, united by love and purpose. The world still had so much work to do, so many injustices to correct, so many systems to reform. But in this moment, walking together in the sunshine, they were proof that change was possible. That night, Harrison received an email from Marcus, the flight attendant. It included a photo of a young woman in a pilot's uniform standing in front of a Skylux plane. The caption read, "My daughter just completed her training. She's the first person in our family to become a pilot. Thank you for creating a company where people like us can thrive. Thank you for standing up when it mattered. You changed more lives than you'll ever know." Harrison stared at the photo for a long time. Then he forwarded it to Simone with a simple message. "This is why we don't give up. This is why we keep fighting. Because every life we touch goes on to touch other lives. The circle keeps expanding." She wrote back immediately. "Mom used to say that kindness is like planting seeds. You might not see the tree grow, but someday someone will sit in its shade. I think she'd be happy to know her kindness grew into a forest." Harrison thought about forests and seeds, and circles closing. He thought about how one woman's generosity 25 years ago had saved his struggling company. How that company had provided him the platform to save her grandson decades later. How that salvation had inspired reforms that would protect countless others. How those protected others would go on to create even more change. It was all connected. Every act of courage, every moment of standing up for what's right, every choice to be kind when cruelty would be easier. They all mattered. They all added up. They all created the world we live in together. And as Harrison finally shut down his computer and headed home, he carried that knowledge with him. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new injustices to fight, new opportunities to make a difference. But tonight, he allowed himself to rest in the certainty that they were making progress. Slowly, imperfectly, but undeniably, they were bending the arc of the moral universe toward justice. So now I want to hear from you. Comment and tell me, have you ever witnessed injustice and found the courage to speak up? Or was there a time you stayed silent and wish you'd acted differently? Share your stories in the comments because your experiences matter and might inspire someone else to be brave when it counts. And if this story moved you, if it made you think about the power we all have to create change, then hit that like button. Subscribe to this channel because, well, keep bringing you stories that challenge us to be better, to do better, to stand up when it matters most. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Someone who's fighting their own battles against discrimination and injustice. Someone who needs to know they're not alone. Thank you for watching this journey with me. Thank you for caring about justice and equality and human dignity. And remember what Harrison taught us. You don't have to be a CEO to make a difference. You just have to be willing to speak up when you see something wrong. You just have to choose courage over comfort. You just have to remember that we're all connected. And when we lift each other up, we all rise together. Until next time, keep fighting the good fight. Keep choosing kindness. Keep believing that change is possible. Because it is, and you're part of making it happen. This story teaches us that silence in the face of injustice makes us complicit. When Harrison witnessed discrimination, he didn't look away or tell himself it wasn't his problem. He used his power to protect the powerless, showing us that privilege comes with responsibility. We learn that racism isn't always overt violence. It often hides in subtle actions like being ignored, receiving cold service, or being treated as less than human. These microaggressions accumulate into trauma, especially for children who absorb these messages about their worth. The story also reveals how prejudice is learned and passed down through generations. Bethany's mother admitted Shed taught her daughter to fear and hate through countless small moments. This reminds us to examine our own biases and be intentional about what we model for the next generation. We see that accountability matters. Bethany faced consequences, not because of one mistake, but because of a pattern of hateful behavior Shed never been challenged on before. Most importantly, we discover that kindness creates ripples we may never see. Lorraine's generosity decades earlier came full circle to protect her grandson. Every act of courage, every moment we choose compassion over cruelty, plants seeds that grow into forests of change. We don't need CEO-level power to make a difference. We just need the courage to speak up when it matters. Now, I want to hear your voice. Have you ever witnessed racism and wished you'd spoken up? Or did you find the courage to intervene when someone needed protection? Drop your story in the comments below, because your experience could inspire someone else to be brave. Comment number 1 if you believe more companies should follow Harrison's example of accountability. Comment number 2 if you think Bethany's sentence was fair. And comment number 3 if this story changed how you'll respond to injustice in the future. If this story touched your heart and made you think differently about standing up for what's right, smash that like button. Subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss stories that challenge us to be better humans. Share this video with your family, your friends, your coworkers, anyone who needs to understand that we all have the power to create change. Thank you for spending this time with me, for opening your heart to this difficult but necessary story. May you always have the courage to stand up when you see wrong, the wisdom to examine your own biases, and the compassion to treat every person with the dignity they deserve. Together, we can build a world where children like Elijah never have to experience hatred, where mothers like Simone are treated with respect, and where people like Harrison use their power to lift others up. Until next time, choose kindness, speak truth, and never stay silent when it matters most. Peace and love to you all.